I think it's important just to say this because whatever community we go to, whatever place we're at, there are always an abundance of rumors floating around. And the rumor I want to dispel today is that unity of jurisdictions does not destroy the traditions that exist in all of the 14 different Orthodox groups that are here in the United States. You know, people bring this up constantly. And in fact, this whole argument surfaced in our own community just this last couple of days. That the purpose of this group and the purpose of the Assembly of Bishops is to destroy the Greek language and the Greek Orthodox Church. And that is not true. So, language and culture of the 14 jurisdictions will continue to exist regardless of what the outcome of the Assembly of Bishops is. And there's no reason why those traditions cannot coexist in a unified Orthodox Church. I just want to make that point very clear before we begin. The next thing the next part of the speech, actually, I'm not going to make. And it's about Orthodox reunion and overcoming the curse of jurisdictionalism in America. Rather than me doing something that's been done much better, I'd like to refer you to the keynote address delivered by Father Josiah Trenholm, PhD, at a parish life conference sponsored by the Diocese of Wichita and Mid-America, which is Antiochian Diocese. I don't know if you were there when Father Trenholm spoke. I don't know whether it's Wichita or El Paso, I guess it was. Anyway, Father Trenholm traces the quest for unity from Old Testament times and bases his premise on the words of Psalm 132 and the quest for unity among the Israelites, and how that is very much pertinent to us Orthodox Christians today. He follows this discussion by pointing out how we contemporary Orthodox trivialize the current state of our disunity and presents a series of arguments as to why we are wrong. Father Trenholm then finishes his paper with a series of recommendations for the accomplishment of Orthodox unity in America. He was invited to join us today, and he had already had a previous commitment for another speech elsewhere. But he encouraged the meeting. He looks forward to appearing at a future forum of OCL. And in your folder, under a section called Resources, you can find the internet connection to his talk, which is all printed there. It's, I think, well worth your time. It may take you 20 or 30 minutes to read. But if you want a firm background in the reasons why unity should be, I think this is the best place to go. Now, 3 topics I'm going to allude to, and given that there are 3 priests present and an archbishop, I'll stand corrected if I misspeak, because there are things that I don't know too much about, and I had to do a crash course in the last 4 days to try to bring myself up to speed. The things I'm going to talk about are the ecumenical synods, canon laws, and finally the plans for the Great and Holy, or the 8th Ecumenical Synod, and how the Bishop of the Assembly of Bishops relates to that long-awaited ecumenical meeting. First of all, what are ecumenical synods? They're extraordinary gatherings of bishops which primarily decide dogmatic formulations based in the face of heresy. Secondly, they issue canonical legislation which governs the administration of the church. Normally seven ecumenical councils are recognized as laying the foundations for our current beliefs in Orthodoxy. These 7 councils were followed in the path of not something called an ecumenical council, but rather First Apostolic Conference, which took place in about 50 AD, 20 years or so after the crucifixion of Christ. It is considered by both Catholics and Orthodox as a prototype of the later councils. This council decided that Gentile converts to Christianity were not obligated to keep most of the laws of Moses, including the rules regarding circumcision. However, they did retain some dietary rules of the Jews and prohibition of fornication and idolatry. The description of this first council actually can be found in the Acts of the Apostles. So you can read about that council that took place at that time if you so wish. After that, with the establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire by the Emperor Constantine, there were 7 ecumenical councils that took place. Basically, they were called for the repudiation of so-called heresies and the establishment of basic Christian beliefs as they are expressed in the Nicene Creed, which we say every Sunday in church. I'm not going to go into detail about these councils, but the first council was held in Nicaea in 325, and it adopted the Nicene Creed. Some variations have taken place since that time, but minor ones. And basically, it's the language that we use today in our own church services. The other major council was the Council of Ephesus in 431, which repudiated Nestorianism and proclaimed the Virgin Mary as the Mother of God, or the Theotokos. There were other councils which dealt with other heresies that came up from time to time. Perhaps they're not so important to us now because they're lost in history, but they were important at that time. They were hot button topics amongst all Christians. And finally, the councils came to a recognition of what is and what isn't. What are the basic tenets of our Orthodox philosophy and religion? The last of the councils was the 7th council, which was the Second Council of Nicaea, and took place in 787. And that council resulted in the restoration of the veneration of icons. So that ended the iconoclastic controversy that occurred in the church. When at some time earlier, because of probably the influence of Eastern philosophy, there was a movement against the use of icons in our church, because people felt that the icons were being venerated not as representations of certain kinds of rites of passage in the church, but rather as they were venerated for the person involved. And so there was some lack of clarity. The icons were destroyed, and then in 787 they were brought back, and we celebrate that event. I believe it's the first Sunday of Lent is always the Sunday of the restoration of the icons. Since that time, there have not been any further ecumenical councils. And so, 1,000 years has passed, more than 1,000 years, and we're waiting for a new ecumenical council so that we can sort of catch up on unfinished business and go forward. In the meantime, in the interim, the tradition of canon law continued. Changes were made in various jurisdictions, added to the canons. Canon law, more correctly, should be called the tradition of the holy canons. And that tradition involves persons who are vested with authority, such as bishops, with the means of creating, formulating, validating, executing, amending, and even revoking laws through synodical or conciliar action. Since the church had started to fragment, the Eastern Orthodox Church, there were councils of bishops with the Patriarchate of Constantinople. In Moscow, they had their own synods and councils. Each place had their own grouping of people. In Antioch, others, so that canon law, as it developed, is slightly different from one Orthodox jurisdiction to another. So there's a real need at some time in the future to go back and take a look at the canons and see if they can get them all to be in agreement one with the other. Now, there's a difference between canon law in the Orthodox Church and in the Roman Catholic Church. And the Roman Catholics are much more law-oriented. And their society was a society based on laws, and they viewed the canons as an extension of those laws. Whereas in the East, the laws were important, but people could more easily get around those laws. And it was not as important to an individual's salvation in the Eastern Church as opposed to the Western Church to be hard-nosed about following the rules. And the rules could sometimes be modified or ameliorated through something called economy or economia. And that was when hierarchs or priests, as representatives of the hierarchs, could make exceptions to many canon laws as individual circumstances required. They certainly couldn't make exceptions to permit people who didn't believe in the Nicene Creed and in the first 7 ecumenical councils to be Orthodox. But things that followed afterwards, there are possibilities of some modification. And I'm not going to get into all of that discussion, but let me refer you to a short video that you can watch, also listed in resources, called An Impatient Patience. And it's an interview with Metropolitan Haikalis, where I think all of you know him. It's available on the Orthodox, the OCL.com website. You go up to the top and there's a button that says Archives. And you just put in WARE, W-A-R-E, press the button, and it will show you the leads to the tape. And the video is there, and you can see it. It takes about 30 minutes. It's an interview between Archbishop Ware and Father Trenum. And he talks about the earlier councils, the need for a council to deal with issues, and then he gives a long discussion on the topic of economia, which is, I think, done much better than I could do. Besides, I don't want to venture too far into those waters, because I'll get myself into trouble. So now let's go on to the third thing the President will talk about, and that is the need for a ecumenical council. And this has been discussion started in the 1920s about the gathering of all Orthodox leaders in another ecumenical council. The planning has been taken. This is the Pan-Orthodox Conference with representatives from almost all the canonical Orthodox bodies met at Champs-Élysées near Geneva at the Orthodox Center of the Patriarch of Constantinople in 1976. And from 1976 forward, with a lot of going forward and going backward, individual jurisdictions stating their points of view, trying to come to some kind of compromise, they have been working toward holding this ecumenical synod. Part of the manifestation of the synod is the Assembly of Bishops, which is taking place at the present time throughout the world. And I think we'll have, I'm going to stop right here before I think you've heard enough. But keep in mind that we have, in terms of government, we have our ecumenical synods, we have our local diocesan and patriarchal synods, the canon law, and now finally we're pointing to a 8th synod. I'm sorry I'm so breathless today. When you get to be 80, you're more breathless than from 7. But thank you very much.
Just a couple quick comments.
Yes.
Typically, we cannot plan an ecumenical council.
Pardon me?
We cannot plan an ecumenical council. A council usually is declared ecumenical, and there are some theologians and historians feel that we already have the 8th, which I think was called Entrulo, probably a couple hundred years or 100 years after the 7th.
Right.
So what?
That's a disputed. Some say
it
yes,
is. It is. But that's again. This is the discussion And what a great and holy council that we're looking forward to, that they started organizing on roads in the 1960s, and they still haven't come up with the actual framework of what they're going to talk about.
Very complicated.
It is. But, you know, I don't want you to think that, you know, just because we have a gathering of Orthodox Christians and bishops across the world that makes it ecumenical. Usually history declares something ecumenical. And typically it deals with the dogma of the church. It clarifies what we believe as Orthodox Christians. All the things that the Great and Holy Council need to deal with, extremely important in the life of everyday modern Orthodox Christians. But like I said, and hopefully as this assembly continues, we can start moving that along. Local councils, even a council here in the United States, could have a profound effect on the history of Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to look at everything just being worldwide. Even the local church, much of what we have is local elite that we got from the ecumenical councils came in local councils that were finally affirmed and stood up to. So this effort of having a council here in this country is extremely important. So I just wanted to add that.